Good afternoon, everyone. I think we should probably get started. I'm sure some people will trickle in as we go along. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon's Distinguished Visitor Speaker Series talk. Some of you, if not most of you, were at the Philanthropy in the Law Symposium yesterday, so thanks for that, and hopefully you had a chance to think about what we discussed yesterday at the symposium, and in light of the talk today, might have some questions that have sort of percolated in the last day or so, and feel free to ask questions at the end of the talk. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Thomas Kelly, who is in from University of North Carolina Law School at Chapel Hill. He is a professor there and also faculty supervisor for the Community Development Law Clinic. In that capacity, he works with third-year law students who provide legal counsel to community-based nonprofit organizations across North Carolina. So Professor Kelly also teaches and writes on the area of the law of nonprofit organizations and on international law and development. His nonprofit law scholarship focuses on the emerging fourth sector, hybrid for-profit, nonprofit organizations that are changing the face of American charity and philanthropy. So I give you Professor Kelly.
Thank you, John, and I want to begin by thanking the Robson Hall University of Manitoba faculty for hosting me here in Manitoba. Folks have been great. John and others took me out to a really nice meal last night, so I'm really beginning to warm on this part of the world, even though I understand that it's often not very warm. I am going to talk a little bit about social enterprise. I've got a bunch of notes here. I'll kind of dive into my prepared remarks, but if I sense that I'm not capturing my audience, I'll just stop and you can start asking questions and we can have a conversation. So, social enterprise. There's a relatively recent development in the United States and in Canadian society and law that revolves around this thing called social enterprise. I don't know how much you all know about this or how much you've talked about it. But you, young lawyers, or those who soon are going to be young lawyers, will have the opportunity to serve this emerging social enterprise sector. This may be a source of money for you because the client base in this sector is growing. But more important than that, if you learn about this new sector, this social enterprise sector, these new developments, and you learn how to serve its legal needs, you might find yourself on the cutting edge of an important new social movement, social and economic movement, really, and you just might have some fun as basically you and folks in that sector help to define it. And that's something that I guess I pause for a bit of avuncular advice. I'm known in my law school and my law faculty for spending a lot of time giving my students career advice and life advice and things like that. And so one little nugget that I'm sure you've heard from other folks, other faculty members, is that as you become a lawyer, if you want to become a happy and productive lawyer, it's not enough just to make good money. That your satisfaction is going to come from the help that you provide to your clients and your communities. And here in this social enterprise sector, there are going to be some very, very interesting, engaging, important contributions that you lawyers can make where you'll have a lot of fun and get a lot of satisfaction doing it. So what is social enterprise? I'll talk more about it later, and I'm going to try and give you a bunch of examples of social enterprises that I've worked with. But in essence, a social enterprise is an enterprise that has one foot in the world of charity and nonprofit organizations, trying to address social and often environmental problems and assist those in need. But it also has one foot in the world of business, trying to create profits, money. Its proponents, that is social enterprise proponents, claim that this social enterprise sector represents an evolutionary step beyond the outdated notion of a three-sector society comprised of governments and business and nonprofit or charitable organizations. They claim that social enterprise, which blends business and nonprofit motives, is an emerging fourth sector in the United States. And from what I learned yesterday, talking to a bunch of people around here, in Canada as well. So in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the contested and still kind of up in the air definitions of social enterprise. It's new enough, this social enterprise notion and the social enterprise sector is new enough in the United States that not everyone agrees what it is. But first, let me begin by telling you how I kind of stumbled into this world of social enterprise and a little bit about some of the complicated legal issues that folks in this area face. So now, a bit about me, because I'm going to tell you how I stumbled into this world. Although I teach lecture classes and seminars at my law school in North Carolina, much of my teaching happens in our law school's clinical programs. In my case, I supervise what we call a community development law clinic. Really, it would be better named a nonprofit law clinic, because what we do is provide legal advice to nonprofit organizations, but we decided to call it a community development law clinic because that sounds sexier, and we thought we'd be able to raise more money for it. In my clinic, I work intensively with 8 third-year law students. They work in teams of 2, that is, the students work in teams of 2 under my close supervision for the entire academic year, and they provide comprehensive, challenging legal, they provide comprehensive legal counsel on challenging issues to nonprofit organizations in North Carolina. I'll tell you a little bit more about this clinic because I figure as students you might be interested in this idea. I know that you have clinical programs here in Canada as well. In any case, each student gets 3 credits per semester, 3 academic credits per semester for the work that they do in the Community Development Law Clinic. They also have to take a separate lecture class on the law of nonprofit organizations, which I teach. The students who participate in the community programs, they routinely report that their clinic experience is the hardest thing that they've done in law school, but they also routinely report that it's the most rewarding thing that they do in law school. My clinic students, again, who work with me closely throughout the year, they incorporate new nonprofit organizations. They sometimes recreate nonprofit organizations in relatively complex, multi-tiered subsidiary corporate structures for various reasons. They negotiate and draft contracts on behalf of nonprofit organizations. They work on property law issues. They also advise nonprofit organizations how to comply with state and particularly federal tax laws, and lots of other things. Basically, in the clinic, we do, on behalf of nonprofit organizations, pretty much anything that I feel either competent to supervise or, in my judgment, I can quickly become competent to supervise. So we take on a very broad range of things. The students who sit first chair in all these matters get great transitions from the world of law school to the world of law practice. And at the same time, community organizations in North Carolina get high-quality legal advice that they otherwise just would not be able to afford. So back to social enterprise. About 10 years ago, a new type of client started making its way to our door in the law clinic. I didn't really know it at the time, but these organizations were on the cutting edge of what now has become known as the social enterprise movement. Let me tell you about my first experience with kind of the first wave of social enterprise in the United States. It was in the mid-1990s, and in fact, my first experience with these social enterprise organizations came before the clinic was up and running. I started as basically as a pro bono attorney. I started working with some of these organizations. Later, when I formed the law clinic, I took some of these organizations into the clinic as clients. To our clinic came a citizens group that wanted to do something about drug addiction. The fact that addicts in our community were incarcerated, generally, rather than treated, and as soon as they were released, they went right back to addiction and to drug dealing. So this community group wanted a long-term residential treatment option as an alternative to incarceration, but they had a total of less than $40,000 in pledges with which to work. So under the guidance of a social entrepreneur, again, at the time, there wasn't really that classification, that word social entrepreneur. It existed, but it wasn't in wide circulation. But this guy, Kevin McDonald, he was a classic social entrepreneur. With his help and his guidance as the executive director, this group launched Triangle Residential Options for Substance Abusers, which is known as TROSA, the acronym TROSA, as a sustainable, largely self-supporting organization. It formed as a charity under United States law, but it had one foot firmly planted in the world of commercial enterprises. So their business model at TROSA, and since then we've dealt with a lot of other similar organizations, TROSA accepted residents, that's what they called the recovering drug addicts. They accepted the residents into a 2-year residential treatment program. While in the program, these residents received vocational training and also what's called soft skills training, which is how to basically get up in the morning with an alarm clock, how to groom yourself, go to work, show up on time, look at people in the eye, shake people's hands, stuff like that, stuff that I think we all pretty much take for granted. But part of the training was in soft skills, part of it was in vocational skills, so they were basically learning how to work in various industries, and TROSA basically taught these skills by itself, this charitable organization launching a series of different industries. They started a moving company, they started a bricklaying company, they started a house painting company, a landscaping company, a food service company, and many other companies. The profits that were generated by these various commercial ventures, these various businesses, went back into the organization and covered the cost of providing food and shelter and medicine and counseling to those residents. TROSA became a national model in the United States. It's grown into a multi-million-dollar-a-year organization, and it's become a charitable darling of the social enterprise movement in the United States. Kevin, the social entrepreneur that I mentioned, has won national awards as a social entrepreneur, and business schools around the country now write case studies about Kevin McDonald and TROSA. But TROSA, as a social enterprise, faced daunting legal issues, as do many social enterprises that have one foot in the world of charities and one foot in the world of for-profit organizations. I wrote a law review article in 2005 that summarized some of those problems, and in fact, it might have even been that law review article that John found that ended up with me here now. I'm not sure if it was that or another article. Okay, it was the 2000. I wrote another one in 2009. About the second wave of social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. So anyway, I'm not going to go over in detail, at least not right now, the types of legal issues that these hybrid organizations have to deal with, but they include, the one that I kind of harp on the most, is a federal doctrine in the United States. It's a federal doctrine that is imposed by the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, called the Commerciality Doctrine. And it basically is a legal doctrine that, at least from my point of view, randomly and unpredictably punishes nonprofit charitable organizations that become too market-oriented, too commercial, too entrepreneurial. The bottom line was, and still is, that the laws in the United States and the legal system in the United States that govern charitable organizations were designed to regulate soup kitchens and other forms of almsgiving, simple, old-fashioned charities. And it just wasn't able to deal with. The legal system was not able to deal with nonprofit social enterprises that were engaging in these market-oriented strategies to deal with social problems. So that was kind of the first wave of social enterprise in the United States. And of course, that's still going on. The type of enterprise that I just described, TROSA, has become a model. They are growing all over the United States. These charities that have aggressive earned income strategies. And in fact, yesterday at the conference I was attending downtown, there was a panel that included some similar, well, they weren't nonprofit actually, but similar social enterprises here in Winnipeg. But more recently, there's been a new wave of social entrepreneurs that's made its way to our community development law clinic in North Carolina. And my students and I have had to puzzle our way through providing them legal advice where there really, in the United States, and I think it's true in Canada, is no clear legal path to follow. So let me give you a couple of examples of that newer wave. One that's actually kind of part of the old wave. It's part new, part old. But anyway, this is a group of nutrition and public health PhD students from our community in Chapel Hill who wanted to start a fast food restaurant to model healthy eating in poor, underserved, in that case primarily a poor, underserved, primarily African American community. Their business model, because these days, as you may or may not know, even charities need business models, but their business model called for a fixed menu in this fast food restaurant. There would be fixed prices for the food that was going to be served, and the restaurant would be staffed by professional food service folks. But their reason for existing, the core motivation, or at least most of the core motivation, it wasn't to maximize profits, although these people hoped that they were going to be able to make a profit. But that wasn't their core motivation. Their core motivation was that they wanted to address these public health and nutrition needs in this underserved community. So in this particular case, when my students and I looked into their business plan, we really came to the conclusion that they were not going to be able to make a profit, that this project just wasn't going to cash flow. And so in this case, we advised them to form as a charity in the United States. But it was, and one of the reasons that we advised them to form as a charity is because in order to break even, they were going to have to get charitable contributions, and they were going to have to be able to get grants from private foundations and governmental entities and so forth. So that's why we advised them to form as a charity. But I will tell you, it was very, very difficult and required some pretty serious lawyering on the part of my students in order to convince the Internal Revenue Service in the United States that they should qualify as a charity. Ultimately, basically what we did was we threatened to go to court. We weren't going to back down, and I think the IRS people just decided they didn't want the bother of a bunch of enthusiastic students taking them to court, and so they backed off, and now the organization is basically carrying through on its business plan. Let me give you another example, and this is maybe a little more typical of the type of social enterprises that we're seeing now in North Carolina and in the United States. So this is a young couple, also PhDs, who grew up in a small rural town in North Carolina, an agricultural town that had been devastated economically by the collapse of North Carolina's tobacco economy. So this couple, they bought a once grand but now decrepit building on the town's main street. And they wanted to turn it into a business incubator that would, among other things, have facilities for food producers to create and sell value-added agricultural projects like premium breads, pies, organic foods, preserves, stuff like that. Their motivation in buying this building and establishing this incubator was to revive this desperate town's agricultural economy. But through their efforts, if the town were to begin to thrive economically, they wanted to benefit from that. If it were to boom and become a regional center and real estate values were to increase, they wanted to benefit from that. They wanted a piece of the equity that would be developed. They wanted to make money through the application of their entrepreneurial energies. So the question for our students, I suppose it's a question for you, it's a question for regulatory authorities in the United States. Is this a commercial venture, or is this some sort of charity? Or maybe is it a combination of the two? Basically, the answer that these folks gave is that it's a social enterprise, which by definition means that it combines the charitable and the for-profit motives. The problem is that there's no clear legal path for those organizations. There's no clear legal category. And again, that's going to be your job, basically, in the next generation, is to figure out how to do this well. In this case, what we recommended for this group is that they in the United States, what right now is a standard answer to social enterprises like this is what people refer to as a multiple entity solution. It's that you try to isolate out the charitable part of what the folks want to accomplish, and you put that in what we call a 501c3 corporation, a charitable corporation that's tax exempt, and you try and isolate out to the degree that you possibly can the for-profit stuff, and you put that in a for-profit entity, in this case It was a limited liability company, which I understand you don't have in Canada. It's a little bit like a limited partnership, but with better, well, more flexibility than a limited partnership. In any case, that's what we did in that instance. So again, the essential problem is that organizations like these, they're mixed for-profits and non-profits, and whichever form they choose, they often don't neatly fit within the pre-existing legal and social categories. It's worth highlighting that one important difference from the earlier wave, the first wave of social entrepreneurs that I told you about, is that the organizers of these new social enterprises, they self-identify. These are people your age, basically. They now self-identify as social entrepreneurs, pursuing mixed for-profit and charitable outcomes. Their motives truly are, I mean, I've talked to a lot of them, and I've tried to dig into, like, really at the heart, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And the conclusion that I've come to is that their motives truly are mixed. They're mixed at the core. And the thing that's different about this new breed of social entrepreneurs is that they are very assertive in their belief that it's okay. It's okay, in fact, it's a good thing to have these mixed motives. And you, meaning me, the old people who make these laws, need to figure out how to accommodate us. So they often come to us with questions about whether they ought to form as a for-profit or a non-profit, or one of these newfangled hybrid forms, hybrid business forms that many of the social entrepreneurs have heard about. I'm going to mention these hybrids that are being developed in the United States. I'm just going to mention them in a couple of minutes, and then if people are interested in hearing more details, we'll do that during question and answer. The fact is, right now in the United States, many of these social entrepreneurs choose to form their businesses as for-profits, and there are a few reasons why. One is just basic operational flexibility. There are, in the United States, it's true, I think it's true in Canada as well, that there are far more onerous regulations and a lot of kind of onerous regulations of charitable organizations. There's a lot more reporting. There's a lot more of the government standing over the shoulder of the organization and saying, no, you can't do that. No, you can't pay that salary to that person because that's too much like a commercial enterprise. So one reason these social entrepreneurs tend to choose the for-profit form is that the government, there's just less regulation and more operational flexibility. Another reason is because many of these social enterprises, they require capital. They require money up front in order to kind of make the project go. And it's true in the United States, I'm sure it's true in Canada as well, that it's a lot easier to raise a significant amount of capital as a for-profit than it is as a nonprofit or charity. But finally, the reason that these social entrepreneurs often choose the for-profit form is that they're very frank about wanting to benefit themselves if they're, well, I'll define this term in a minute, but if they're double or triple bottom line plans, they're mixed motivations, if those plans end up producing significant wealth, they're very frank about the fact that they want to benefit. They want a piece of the action. They want part of the equity that's going to be produced. So that's who we're dealing with in our clinic. These are the types of projects that we've seen coming to us more and more. As you know, I think I indicated, the legal solutions don't really, there aren't easy legal solutions there, and that's going to be your job when you graduate from law school to figure out what those legal solutions should be. All right. Now I'm going to do, arguably what I should have done when I started the talk, which is actually talk a little bit about what we mean by social enterprise. What are the definitions? I didn't do that for a couple of reasons, one of which is that people don't really agree. There is no solid definition out there of what social enterprise means. The other reason I didn't start with that is because it may be different among law schools or law students in Canada, but I find that if I start right out in interacting with my students with doctrine and theory, I lose everybody within the first 2.5 minutes. So I thought I'd start out with kind of some concrete examples of what this is, and then now we can go and talk a little bit more. We can kind of fill in the gaps with a little bit of doctrine, a little bit of theory, a little bit of definitional work. Again, it works in the United States. I don't know about here in Canada. But so what is social enterprise? I gave you 3 examples. And as I said, there's not broad agreement about even what defines this, but as its proponents, because there are proponents and detractors of this notion of social enterprise, according to its proponents, it's an evolutionary step beyond the three-sector organization of society. According to others, it's much ado about nothing, that there's really nothing new here. It's some slogans cooked up by self-congratulatory .com 20-somethings who assumed that their rapid wealth accumulation back in the 1990s was a result of their entrepreneurial genius and not a freakish bubble in the high-tech markets. Because that's a lot of who has animated this growth in the social enterprise sector. Young people who are assertively and aggressively entrepreneurial, but who want to do good. So social enterprise, it means different things to different people, and it's new enough in the United States and certainly in Canada that the nomenclature is still contested. But among its proponents, who, by the way, are sometimes, even I find it hard not to poke fun at some of the jargon. I came to the social enterprise sector as kind of a disinterested outsider. I've to a certain degree been kind of sucked into it because of the legal work that I've done. But for those who are true believers, it is a very, very jargon-heavy area. And so detractors and skeptics poke a lot of fun at the language that's used. But for proponents, social enterprise means bringing the spirit and the methods of the free market and the business sector to bear on intractable social problems. To some, it means creating sustainable, I feel like I should be using air quotes for all of these terms, sustainable social benefit by building aggressive, market-oriented earned income strategies into the work, even if the work is going to be undertaken by charitable organizations and for charitable purposes. It means taking the entrepreneurial, socially beneficial projects to scale so that they create systematic, transformative, society-wide change. Although the truth is the examples that I gave you earlier from my community really aren't at that kind of scale, at least not yet. It means always carefully measuring the outcomes of the work that takes place. So this means finding new metrics beyond mere profits. These are all words that, I don't know if some of you are familiar with this area, but these are all words that you will hear over and over. So you have to find new metrics beyond mere profits to measure success, and those metrics may involve measuring social return on investment, otherwise known as SROI, as a way of quantifying the social benefit that's being produced by these entities. It often means, in the social enterprise sector, measuring success against a triple bottom line. How many, have we all heard that term before? Triple bottom line, double bottom line? Well, some, yeah, maybe. Anyway, triple bottom line, which generally it's defined, the triple bottom line or double bottom line is defined variously, but generally it means the triple bottom line is comprised of profits, community, and environment. Or, as some of the really good people with jargon like to say, people, profits, planet. So that's the triple bottom line. So, as I've said a couple of times, social enterprise means moving beyond the old three-sector social organization in which we had the governmental sector, the business sector, and the nonprofit sector, and acknowledging the emergence of a new fourth sector that includes elements of both business and nonprofits. So just to, I've kind of said that there are skeptics about whether this is, about the social enterprise generally, and there's a fair amount of poking fun at it from certain quarters. So not everyone is enamored of the fourth sector, and the skeptics tend to fall into two camps. There's one, the kind of hardcore camp, and this is associated with Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics, that, I'm sure it's true of your law studies in Canada. It's definitely true in the United States that that this mode of thought basically economics and law and economics has basically completely taken over the academy, makes it hard for people like me who just really don't like economics. Actually, I'll digress and I'll tell the little joke that you might have heard before, which is three people stuck on a desert island. One has I see someone not, anyway, one is a chemist, one is a physicist, and one is an economist. And all they have between them on this desert island is a can of beans. And so they're trying to figure out how to get the can of beans open because they're hungry. And the chemist says, well, if we just put it in the sun and we can use a reflective surface and intensify the sun, that we will create a chemical reaction and the can will just burst and we can pick it up and eat it. And the physicist says, no, if we scale that coconut tree and we can, at exactly the proper angle and with the proper acceleration, hit the rock just right, it will burst open and we can pick it up and eat it. And the economist looks at them and shakes his head and says, just assume a can opener. So anyway, that kind of sums up what I tend to think about economics. Sorry if you're a law and economics person. I'm grounded much more in anthropology and the social sciences. Anyway, with that digression, let's see. So some people kind of criticize social enterprise from the perspective of the Chicago School of Economics. And basically, they believe that this whole idea of social enterprise is a dangerous, potentially destabilizing bunch of hokum. And that the best thing that corporations can do to create social benefit is to focus on profit making and allow the free hand of the unregulated market to do its work, to do its magic. To this group, social enterprise is a dangerous distraction from the all-important business of making money, creating wealth that eventually will trickle down to those in need. A second camp, a second bunch of skeptics about social enterprise, their skepticism is grounded in the fact that they don't see anything particularly harmful about these ideas, and they might even agree that blending charity and enterprise can produce some good results, but basically what they say is that the social enterprise movement represents thinking, or is, I guess, repackaging thinking that's been around at least since the time of Ben Franklin, and that there's really nothing new here. The fact is that Ben Franklin and many years after that, Andrew Carnegie in the United States, they advocated investment instead of handouts, careful measuring of outcomes, and demanding social return on investment, even if that's not the exact term that they used when they were talking about it. So some of this is not new. It's also true from the for-profit corporate side that for at least, well, for a long time, I won't try and pin it down historically, but that for a long time, at least since the early 20th century, corporations in the United States, business corporations, and I'm sure it's true in Canada as well, have been taking community needs into consideration in setting their policies and deciding what they're going to do, and that this has been reflected in the United States and around the world in what's referred to as the corporate social responsibility movement. So again, this second criticism of the social enterprise sector is that there's really nothing new here. Let's see. I'm gonna skip over the portion of the talk because I'm hoping that some of you have some questions or are maybe a teeny bit curious about this. So I'm gonna skip over what social well, no, I'm not. Sorry, I've changed my mind. I'm gonna tell you, in essence, what social entrepreneurs say in response to those criticisms. They basically say that no, actually, there is something new and different about this, and that this is an evolutionary step. And basically, the crux of it is that the social enterprise movement believes that we ought to live in a world where we have at least some corporations where social outcomes are ineluctably part of the bottom line, not just something that the corporation does on the side to maybe accomplish good, maybe enhance its market share and its reputation. That's not what social entrepreneurs say. That's not what social enterprise is. It's where social outcomes are part of the bottom line, and they're actually part of the measurement of corporate success. And that's what's different, and that's what's new. So, if that's a quick overview, first you got some examples of social enterprises in my community, and And then we talked about kind of some of the definitions of social enterprise and some of the, some of the jargon associated with social enterprise. So if that's what it is, why should lawyers and law students pay attention? One reason is that to an increasing degree in recent years, social entrepreneurs, the people who are starting these social enterprises, are demanding that we do so. They're demanding that we pay attention to these difficult legal issues associated with having one foot in the charitable sector and one foot in the business sector. And by the way, another reason we ought to pay attention to it is that some of them, particularly those that are really kind of have aggressive national strategies for bringing these companies to scale, they're willing to pay. They're willing to pay market rates for the legal work that needs to be done. So that's yet another reason. They found, these social entrepreneurs, that it is legally difficult, at least in the United States, to have one foot in both of these worlds. And basically the legal system, and also, not incidentally, the investment community in the United States and in Canada, although what I know about is the United States, that they don't know what to do with the hybrid nature of these organizations. And this is why they say lawyers have to get involved if the fourth sector, this emerging fourth sector, is going to flourish. Two very simple examples of the types of legal issues they face. One is, if the social enterprise forms as a for-profit corporation, for example, they risk being sued by their own shareholders. This is something that social entrepreneurs talk about over and over. The problem is, say the corporation, the social enterprise that's being formed, has tremendous potential to produce profits, but they're not really achieving all of those profits. They're not producing as much wealth as they could, and the reason is because they're focusing on also achieving their social mission. Well, in the United States, the law is unclear, and also the law varies across different jurisdictions, but it's at least arguable that the corporation could be sued by its own shareholders for failing to maximize the profits. So that's one difficult legal issue that for-profit social enterprises have to deal with, and there are many others as well. On the other hand, if they form as a nonprofit charity, they risk being shut down by the United States Internal Revenue Service for being too commercial. So basically, whichever way they turn, there are kind of, I don't know, what's the expression, lions at the gate? There are pitfalls, problems. Okay. I am going to skip over a little of this because it's 20 of, and I want to make sure we have at least a little bit of time for discussion. I will tell you that in North Carolina, where I live, and in the United States more generally, there's been in recent years, I would say in the last maybe 5 years, significant, sustained efforts to create what they refer to as a supporting ecosystem for all of these orphaned enterprises that fall into the cracks between for-profit and nonprofit. I'm involved with something called the North Carolina Fourth Sector Cluster Initiative. I don't really know what that means. I came into it late because they were looking for a lawyer to help them. I don't know where they came up with that name. But anyway, it's organizing social enterprises and social entrepreneurs in our region to demand that North Carolina, that the government of North Carolina, recognize this new sector and take steps to create a supportive infrastructure for them. One of the things that, part of this supportive infrastructure for these social enterprises is creating new legal forms, new hybrid legal forms that will accommodate these hybrid entities and basically give them some protection from the legal problems that they face. There are a few new forms that if any of you follows this area, you may be aware of. One, there's a new legal form that's kind of percolating in the United States called the B Corporation, referred to as the B Corp. And it's a kind of a sexy, cool new idea that basically it's a new type of corporation that has both for-profit and non-profit motivations and activities. And the B Corporation basically at least purports to lock the hybrid social and for-profit purpose into the corporation's DNA, corporate DNA, and also protect its managers and its organizers against lawsuit from angry shareholders. So that's the B Corporation idea. There's also something, the same ideas that are similar to the B Corp go under the name of Flexible Purpose Corporation, Socially Responsible Corporation, and things like this. So these kind of hybrid corporate forms are starting to bubble up across the United States, and they're being debated. There's another form that has been proposed and actually adopted by several jurisdictions in the United States called the Low-Profit Limited Liability Company, which goes by the name L3C, which is another approach that's particularly appropriate for small social enterprises that purports to help it deal with some of the legal issues that it faces, and also some of the issues that these organizations face around their inability to attract capital because of their hybrid form. If you all have questions about those entities, we'll have about 15 minutes for question and answer, and so I'm not going to go into the details, but we can talk about them more. So, in conclusion, I joked yesterday that after a half-hour talk, those are the words that everybody's waiting to hear. In conclusion, I spent yesterday at a social enterprise gathering here in Winnipeg, which was sponsored by the Winnipeg Foundation and your law faculty. And from what I can tell, based on the conversation that happened yesterday, Manitoba and Canada have realized that social enterprise is a new and important phenomenon. And they, or I guess it's you, have got some very smart and very creative people working on the question of what to do about it here in Canada. So I submit to you, young people, most of you who are, I wasn't necessarily a young person when I went to law school. I had another career first. But anyway, most of you look pretty young from my perspective. So I submit to you, the young people who are undergoing legal training, that there's opportunity in the social enterprise sector. There's an opportunity to benefit your communities. There's an opportunity to be involved in something interesting and new and exciting, and maybe even an opportunity to make a living as lawyers at the same time that you're having all that fun and satisfaction. So that's my talk on social enterprise, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.